The vision of a young entrepreneur in 1939 has come together and formed into this modern-day marvelous property. Join us now for an exploration of 3924 State Route 131 in Fayetteville, Ohio. Welcome again to 3924 State Route 131 in Fayetteville, Ohio. I'm Greg Traynor and I'm with Wyndham-Lyons Realty. This 477-acre planned hunting, fishing, and recreational estate has two homes, an astonishing and spacious two-story barn, a breathtaking man-made 15-acre lake, both tillable and timbered land, which has been dearly cared for by 3 generations of families and over 80 years. This property was meticulously planned. Tree by tree, building by building, the lake, the food plots, the crop placement, even an airstrip. And many family gathering areas have been planned to bring everybody together. This stunning estate has won the National Wild Turkey Federation Property of the Year. Wildlife abounds, and this property is ready for your enjoyment of deer, turkey, ducks, geese, fish, and amazing stands of mature mast trees, including red oaks, white oaks, chestnuts, hickories, and walnut trees. Those all provide a bounty for attracting and maintaining the wildlife on the property, a near perfect balance that's impossible to recreate without over 80 years of careful planning. Welcome to R.E. Dick Brader Estates. Hello everybody, this is Greg Traynor with Wyndham-Lyons Realty Services, and I am very excited to be joined by David Arnold, the grandson of the great man whose dream it was to bring his family together, now brings us this magnificent property. Thanks so much for joining us today, David.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate it.
Thank you. There's so much about this property that we need to go over, and I hope everybody doesn't mind if I look at my notes. Tell us a little bit about the history of the property and why your grandfather chose this specific property to develop.
Well, it was 1939 that he bought the property, and it was actually a couple tracks. It wasn't one track. He put some tracks together. My grandmother likes to tell a story. My grandma's passed, but she loved to tell this story that one day my grandfather and a couple buddies were out bird hunting. My grandfather was a sportsman. That's really the essence of why this property exists. He was a sportsman all the way through. And at that time, 1939 in Ohio, being a sportsman was mostly birds, upland game, German short-hair pointers. We raised German short-hair pointers. They hunted quail, they hunted pheasant, occasional woodcock. And my grandfather was an entrepreneur in the trucking business, and he had always looked at different pieces of property where he hunted. And when he came to this piece of property, there's actually 3 creeks that come together here. And when he saw those 3 creeks, he literally had the vision at that moment, according to my grandmother, that is what's there today. I mean, he saw it. My grandmother was always amazed and always said, you know, that day he saw it and he knew what he needed to do. It took 50 years to complete, but we are now benefits of that.
Great. Tell us a little bit about the Wild Turkey Federation Award that the property has received, what went into it, and how it's become one of the preeminent turkey properties in the Midwest.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the funny things before I tell you that is that for many years I tried to get turkeys stocked in our area, and the Ohio Department of Natural Resource people that I was talking to said it'll never work. You know, there's not enough habitat. And I knew there was. I'm from West Virginia. We're a big turkey state. And eventually, Ohio started stocking turkeys. So because we were so involved in that, we helped Ohio DNR. We actually let them trap turkeys on our property. They use cannon nets. On the runway, on the airplane runway, they set up cannon nets, and we helped stock other parts of this part of Ohio. It wasn't just the resource, but it was the commitment to conservation that we had. And this was an award given for, it's from the Ohio Turkey Federation, somebody who had conservation in mind, somebody who had an extraordinary property, and the director of the Ohio DNR presented it to me, and we were very honored.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Very amazing. Tell us a little bit about the lake. It's just absolutely gorgeous, and the setting from both of the homes that are on the property. You can see them from just about every part of those homes.
Sure. Well, first off, one of the common questions people ask me all the time is, they say, is this lake stocked? Because it's an extraordinary fishing lake. We don't allow many people to fish there, but the people that I have allowed to fish there are just blown away. And the interesting thing is, it has been stocked, but it was stocked maybe when I was just a kid, and it hasn't been stocked since. So at least 50 years, no stocking. It is a self-perpetuating resource.
So the habitat must be amazing on that lake.
The habitat is such that it just doesn't need it. We do some conservation things to help with that, obviously. We let all the large bass loose. We basically run a slot limit. You know, we keep the medium-sized fish, but let the small ones and the big ones go. No inches or anything. It's just an agreement among our family. So,
got it.
But it has always been extraordinary for largemouth bass. We've caught a couple 7, 8, 6 pound bass out of it.
Amazing.
Yeah, crappie, many crappie, all the bluegill species. You know, it's full.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. Is there anything you can share about the agriculture, the timber on the property, and how your grandfather planned that out?
Yeah, well, you know, this is funny. When my grandfather did this, most people thought he was kind of kooky. You know, this is a place where you get a high per acre rate on your agricultural rental. You know, we do lease about 200 acres. But my grandfather took a couple hundred acres and said, no, we're not gonna, he could have easily turned that into a tillable land.
Right.
So basically what he did is it's succession forest. Now, some of the real big timber that's there were a few woodlots. You know, it wasn't unusual at the turn of the century to have, I'm talking about the early 1900s, to have a large woodlot, and that would have been for firewood. It would have been for things like that. Fence lines. I actually have photos of the farm taken from an airplane probably about the time I was born, maybe a little bit earlier, and it's just open pasture with fence lines and wood timber. So you're looking at succession forest with some really big trees. Interesting enough, I've named most of the big trees.
Nice.
We have Buddha. It's kind of funny, my sister had named it Billy Graham, so I call it Buddha Billy.
That's the big white oak tree,
yeah,
correct?
it's a big white oak. But there's Crazy Arms, there's 8 Ball, there's John Henry. I mean, I can go
Very
on.
nice.
2 Towers. But yeah, these are big, mature, mostly oaks.
Yes. Yeah, when we did a personal tour of the property, I'd never seen mature mass trees like that. We saw it in late summer, early fall, when everything was starting to drop.
Right.
And just from my standpoint, being an avid outdoorsman and conservationist, the planning where those trees are placed on corners of where those lots are and where the crops are. The deer hunting has to be just spectacular on that property, in addition to just the turkey.
Absolutely. You know, I know you know this, Greg, but I'm a hunter, and some people would probably refer to me as a crazed hunter. I hunt a lot. I bow hunt, I muzzle loader, you know, shotgun. I rifle hunt in West Virginia. But you know, this farm, even though that wasn't my grandfather's vision, because he didn't know, whitetail weren't here. You and I know that.
Right.
But younger people are like, they think they've always been here.
Right.
They haven't.
They struggle.
Matter of fact, the first time I told my grandfather there were whitetail on the property, he said, no, there's no whitetail here. And I had to go out and get pictures of their footprints in the snow. And he looked at the picture and, you know, it's pretty obvious. You know.
Right.
He looked at that picture, yep, there's whitetail here.
Yeah.
So, and that was probably, when did that happen? That was probably 40 years ago. So it's turned into a really good sanctuary for whitetail. If you ever fly over it, it's pretty interesting. Again, this land is highly valuable for agriculture. So most people took the opposite track my grandfather did. They actually took out trees. They took out fence lines. They took out woodlots. So as you fly over, what you'll see is a woodlot here, maybe a fence line, and then all of a sudden there's this big block of forest. There's no other big block of forest other than we're also pretty close to, there's just one farm in between us from Indian Creek, which is the state game preserve.
Yes, very nice lakes, timber, open fields, wildlife, they release pheasant. And,
absolutely. And we get an occasional pheasant on the property.
That's great.
I mean, it's not unusual to like
get a flyover.
Yeah, I mean, actually 25 years ago, I had a friend who I let hunt who had dogs, and we would mainly be, you know, looking for woodcock and occasional quail.
Yep.
But, you know, sure enough, every once in a while we'd kill a pheasant. You know, he was always like, where did that come from? And I go, well, it's just stock bird up the road.
Your grandfather carefully planned the home, the estate home on the property for entertainment for family. You had mentioned that wildlife wasn't necessarily the primary goal. Tell us a little bit about the house and some of the neat things that he did with that to make sure the family gathered.
Well, as I told you, my grandfather was a sportsman. This is before being a sportsman was cool. But what he also was a very gregarious person. Again, I mentioned he was an entrepreneur. He entertained on the farm a lot. He entertained clients. He entertained friends. I grew up as a kid. There used to be times where I had to leave because, you know, who knows what kind of debauchery was going on, but it was mostly playing cards and drinking some whiskey. But he entertained a lot, so the house is pretty much a function of that along with the sportsman. So you've got a lot of knotty pine. The cabin that stood on the property, my sister thinks it maybe was the barn. It doesn't really matter, but these are logs from the middle 1800s, so somewhere around Civil War period. Those logs Gramps took apart and then rebuilt the living room out of those logs. It has an ambience that everyone is kind of blown away by.
I agree.
Yeah, and it's just, this is funny. I call the farm the womb. People say, where are you going, Dave? And I say, I'm going back to the womb. And part of that is because I was born there. I mean, I wasn't literally born there. I was born in a hospital, but on day 3 of my life, I was at the property and stayed there. Matter of fact, there's a room in the back that one window looks over the lake and one window looks over the orchard. And we use it as a den, and I'm in there a lot. And one day my mom came in and she said, Dave, you know why you like this room? And I said, yeah, it's because I can close the door and be away from all the craziness of the family. And she said, no. She said, you like this room because that's where your crib was. That's where you first stood up and looked out the window. That's where you first, you know. So the farm means a lot to me. It is based on entertainment, based on sportsmen, and it actually also has a little bit of Art Deco in it. So my grandfather, he was also the kind of person that when he did it right. You know, I ran a company for 40 years. I started a company, and we followed that mantra throughout our career. For 40 years, we always did it right, and I learned that from my grandfather. And so the reason the farm is in such good shape still is because, you know, he didn't go cheap on anything.
Right.
And you know, it's remarkable that it's in as good shape as it is.
The construction, as we went through and did the tour, not only in the house but the barn.
Yes.
It seems like he doubled the requirements of everything.
Absolutely.
To make sure that would last for millennia.
Yeah.
So,
I'm in the whitewater, I still am a little, but I started a whitewater rafting company in West Virginia, and we built our first trailer at the farm. This would have been 1977, and in classic my grandfather, that trailer, I mean, I think it could have been hit by a major shell and still been, you know, it was built so strong. Problem was it was so heavy, we could hardly put any rafts on it because it was already weight limit, but that was my grandfather. He did things right, he built them really well, and they lasted. That trailer still exists, by the way.
Wow.
Yeah.
So on the property, there's also a Caretakers Home as well.
That's correct.
That still overlooks the lake.
Yes.
Has that ever been used for family guests, or has it always been a caretaker home?
No, that's always been a caretaker home. It is in a remarkable location. I mean, it's beautiful. The main house is in a remarkable location too, but that is also, there were a number of buildings on the property when my grandfather bought it. I mentioned earlier in the interview that he bought it in pieces. Well, each one of those pieces obviously had a house on them. And we used those houses over the years, and eventually we knocked them down, burned them down, whatever. There was a Caretakers Home that was logs. Those logs actually, some historical society took them apart, and I think they're in Sharon Woods right now, that they rebuilt it as a cabin. But somewhere in the early 70s, it was time. And the house is also very well built, the Caretaker's house.
Very.
But we never used it for entertainment. We always had caretakers. The farm, this summer, my family, we didn't use a caretaker. I've recently hired a new caretaker. It just works better that way. And the caretaker's job is to cut the grass, maintain a presence, just watch the place,
right.
Occasional odd jobs. We have a lot of ash trees falling now with the, things like that. But no, it was never used as our family. Matter of fact, I've never slept in it. I was tempted. I figured if my wife ever got mad at me, I had a place to go.
Yeah. And I figure too, with the location, there's not a bad view even from the Caretaker's Home.
Right.
Great possibility for somebody, if they do want to build another estate home on the property, that would be the perfect location for it.
And interesting enough, it's not just a powerful location from our perspective. I'm a little bit of a fan of the American Indian tribes, especially the ones that were here. That was a center of activity for American Indians for many, many years. I know that because we found all kinds of artifacts there. I'm talking 10,000 years ago. We're talking about Adena culture. Obviously the Shawnee were also here. Route 68, which touches the farm at one location, Route 131. Well, 68 was the Americans Indian Trail. I mean, that's where
the Buffalo Trace.
Oh, I mean, it was started by buffalo. The American Indians hunted the buffalo. Eventually, when Europeans came, they started using the trail. Eventually horseback, eventually wheels, and eventually automobiles. That's basically the genesis of it. But the point is, these people for at least 10,000 years, and probably a lot more, found that location to be exceptional. And there was one of the reasons for it is the three creeks coming together.
Yes.
But maybe even more important, one of the creeks is called Salt Lick. And if you know anything about American Indian history, salt licks were critical for game.
Absolutely.
You needed it for meat preservation. When I was a kid, I can still remember the salt wells that were there. There were some wells dug. I actually remember a copper pot that was there where they would lower it, get the brine water out, boil it down, get the salt. Somewhere along the line, my grandfather filled those holes because, afraid somebody's going to fall in them, and, you wouldn't get out if you did.
Right.
So those have all been covered up, but that Salt Lick, that location, those three creeks has been a power point for many, many years.
That's amazing. Before we wrap up, I wanted to talk about the barn on the property. That is a architectural engineering marvel to me, just absolutely breathtaking. And there's so many different things you could do with it. Have you ever thought of any ideas of different types of venues for that? It's not used for just storing farm equipment.
Yeah, it has always been used as a working agricultural barn. So when I was a kid, we had livestock. We were, basically real farmers. I grew up messing around with the animals. Eventually, livestock's a tough game for a part-time farmer. My grandfather was never a full-time farmer. So he eventually got rid of it. He went into the sharing of the land and a share agreement with farmers. Eventually we went to a lease. That farm has always been used to store grain, to store hay, to store equipment. But yeah, it would be a phenomenal venue. Again, I'm an entrepreneur. I mean, I see
wedding.
It.
I see when I look at it.
The
I
timber.
See wedding, winery.
Yeah.
Somebody could really turn that into a thriving business inside of an entertainment or entertainment venue inside of a property that they can enjoy themselves. Yeah,
those timbers that are in that barn were hand cut on the farm. I'm sure there was some wood purchased, but if you look at it, you can tell. These are, matter of fact, if you try to pound a nail in it, you can tell, because you almost have to drill stuff before you pound. Those things it's heartwood of virgin timber, a lot of it. And heartwood is, it's strong as steel. So, but the bottom line is, my grandfather had a vision. There's a stone on the property that I had put there. I'll tell you, it's funny, I expected my grandfather to maybe want to be buried on the farm. He decided not to. He was buried near his son, which also makes sense. But after he passed away, I thought, I need to have some kind of a memorial on the farm. So I went and saw a place called Irons Memorial in Mount Orban. I said, I want a big stone with my grandfather's name on it on the farm. And they said, well, we just can't do any stone. And I said, well, where do I get a stone? They said, well, it's got to be granite, so you got to go to the terminal end of the glacier. So I went up to Dayton, which is the terminal end of the glacier, bought a stone from a, quote, rock guy, and had it delivered to Irons Memorial. And when Mr. Irons came out with it, he said, what do you want me to do with it? And I said, I want you to take that truck, the stone was on the back, I want you to drive it into the woods, and when you get stuck, I'll get a tractor and pull you out, and we'll drop it right there. Nice. And he was like, really? I said, yeah, kind of. So anyway, it's in the middle of the woods. It sits out there. Because it's granite, it stands out. It weighs a couple tons. It doesn't take a big rock to weigh a couple tons when it's granite. But anyway, that memorial is there, and it talks about his vision. And basically, metamorphosis is a really interesting thing. You know, most of the time when you think of metamorphosis, you think about a tadpole becoming a frog or a butterfly, but sometimes metamorphosis takes 50 years. Mm-hmm. And what I've watched, what's been my honor to watch, is a farm that just transitioned over, actually more than 50 years, 80 years, like you said, into something really special. And if my grandfather was alive today, he would be smiling, because it's what he had. He didn't have the exact vision, because he didn't know whitetail were coming. He didn't know that gobblers would be on the property gobbling. This morning I woke up to come here. It's February, and all the gobblers were just going crazy because it's warm this morning. Yep. But I feel his presence when I'm in a tree. You know, I mean, I also feel the presence of the Shawnee. I mean, one of the most famous Shawnees ever was a gentleman by the name of Tecumseh. Mm-hmm. And if you do your homework, what you'll find is that Tecumseh was born and raised in this area, and I know Tecumseh was on the property. There's no question in my mind that happened. There's no way a leader would not have been there with the salt licks, and the big Indian community was there and everything else. So anyway, it's a special place.
Yes, yeah, I agree. Yeah. I really appreciate the time you spent with us today to share.
Thanks, Greg.
Your family property, and we have the property listed currently. Joanne Morgan is the lead agent, Wyndham-Lyons Realty. We would love it if you would like to take a tour, to give us a call at 513-322-2905. Again, Dave, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate the opportunity to help and to share your story with everybody.